What's up, guys? I'm Chad Barnes, and welcome to the channel. Here, it's all about real car talk, from simple fixes to smart driving tips and keeping your ride in top shape. If that sounds good to you, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button and make sure you watch all the way through. There's a lot of good stuff coming. Let's get to it.
Running gear. Braking system. There are practically no claims to the braking system. The brakes are disc brakes. The discs are large enough. The front ones are 316mm on petrol, 300mm on diesel, and 302mm on all versions. At the same time, in gasoline rear discs are also ventilated. The calipers are simple and reliable, single piston with a floating bracket front and rear. However, after 2013 there is an electric handbrake, and with it comes a new parking brake mechanism, not with a drum brake inside. The main rotor, but with a screw drive on the main pad. Potentially a troublesome design, but so far no particular problems with the caliper itself, only the electric actuators are let down. They cost inhumanely, from 23,000 pieces, and you need 2 of them. It is good that breakdowns on relatively fresh cars with this system are still rare. By 10 years of operation, fingers may start to sour, and probably, rubber seals of fingers and pistons will require replacement, but with normal maintenance there should be no other problems. Brake lines here do not corrode. Handbrake cables can be changed easily and without problems. ABS unit is quite reliable. Problems. If they happen, it is because of power supply or wiring. By and large, it is only necessary to check whether the car has not gone on a serious off-road. If yes, then not only the body, but also brakes and suspension can become a source of trouble even on fresh cars after restyling. Detail original price of non-original 2 brake system front brake pads 2852 415 Febby 3 739 brake. Pads rear 11 613 83 143 MP 2 158 brake disc front 4088 4 315 optimal 3 783 brake disc rear 3 848 Bosch 3 651 Ferrodo 2 738. Suspension. For most Freelander owners, suspension is just something the car has. And that's a very good thing. Original suspension components are of very high quality, and some go for 200,000 more. It is not for nothing that Freelander 2 often acts as a donor of spare parts for other cars on the EUCD platform. Ford Mondeo, Volvo S80 and not only. Most of all claims collect firm wheel nuts with aluminum cone part, which corrode and can intentionally boil in holes of some wheel discs and hub bearings. However, the last problem is rather Ford's, as the front hub units suffer mainly, which are made in one piece and unified with all platform. They are also suitable from Volvo. They cost from $7,000 for a good brand hub, and the original from $12,000, and the hub is clearly overloaded. It is better not to put wheels with a larger outreach. The numerical designation of the outreach in this case will be smaller, and be careful with Ford's. The original hub units are poorly sealed. The front arms are quite expensive and nominally unbreakable, as with all platform cars, but they are steel and the ball bearing is riveted. Replacement turns out to be elementary. The ball joint of not bad quality is available for sale separately. You can also buy silent blocks. Rear suspension, as it was already said in the first part, is of own English design, and it is McPherson, as well as in front. You can see the difference in approaches to design. All silent blocks of levers from the factory are replaceable. Nothing disposable. The levers themselves are strong with a closed profile. Do not rot to holes. Like sheet metal stamping on the Fords or Volvos, the hub bearing is also changed separately, and their choice is huge. And the rear hubs, all other things being equal, last longer than the front ones. But the silent blocks live less than the front. The lower silent of the transverse arm and the rear silent longitudinal serve well. If 120 to 150,000 kilometers, but replacement is inexpensive. If you put non-original, then less than 1,000 rubles per side for 3 rubbers. True, if the camber bolts sour, then the suspension cannot be adjusted, but such intervention is usually not required. Here the levers are strong. If you do not jump on the rocks, the installation angles are not broken. Detail original price of non-original 2 suspension front L-arm 16 313 optimal 6 937 4U 4 781 front hub. 12 697 Phoebus 4 678 SKF 5 939 rear L-arm silent block out of stock Phoebus 1 482 swag 2 235 rear suspension upper arm 4 172 Stelox 1 647 Moog 3063 rear longitudinal arm silent block 1 262 BGA 455 Phoebus 580 front shock absorber 13 195 mm 4 947 K-bar 7 539 steering with the usual GUR on all motors. Unfortunately, the design is quite troublesome. Not too successful pumps very much dislike the inflated system as a result of fluid leaks or air sucking in the supply hose, the rack. At the mileage of 120 to 150 begins to knock, and the side bushings eat up corrosion. The rack on the Freelander 2 is located in the subframe niche and therefore is strongly polluted even in city cars. Any violation of tightness of covers in such conditions leads to corrosion of the shaft. However, if in time to deal with the problem, it is inexpensive. Ford rakes of this generation are well mastered in repair and feed. Not the first generation of locksmiths. Side bushings, jam nuts, all this is available in repair versions. There are drawings of metal parts to replace plastic and fluoroplastic instead of metal. As for leaking lines, in most cases it is caused by a dirty ruffle of the cooler of the hydraulic oil cooler. It is rarely washed, and overheating of oil leads to degradation of rubber elements of the system and oil seals. There is a small problem with the lock of the steering column. The mechanism jams at minus temperatures due to freezing of the electric drive. If you do not want to wait for the cabin to warm up in winter before driving, it is better to disable the function of locking by STD firm scanner. Well, or you can put a cheat from Volvo. Transmission. General problems in spite of frequent off-road trips. The cars usually have no problems with splines, except for the splines of the corner gear, and the joints hold well. Problems can be thrown up except for the internal tripods of the front axle. They ask for new grease after 100,000, and if you delay with the replacement, you will have to change the joints themselves, and it will cost a lot. The price of the shaft in an assembly of about 90,000 rubles. Separately there are no joints, there is no non-original, you can pick up, but you will have to climb the Volvo forums in search of crosscodes to find a replacement. And the resource will be lower in any case. On Land Rover shafts work with completely different angles than on cars. With rear inner ball joints, such problems are much less frequent, but they do happen. The outer joints, strangely enough, last longer than the inner ones, if the cover is not torn. Mechanical boxes, it is difficult to find a car with automatic transmission, but they were put on diesel versions. The box there is a Ford GetRag M66, a variant quite proven by time. The gearbox itself is strong, but at mileage over 200 the bearings can fail, and at regular towing of trailers on the highway the gear of the sixth gear wears out. 2-mass flywheel is present by default, but it is quite successful. In any case, it is able to pass 200 to 250,000. But the angular gear on M66 is not very good. Even on Aisin automatics it serves longer. However, prices for spare parts and breakdowns are the same. The difference is in the housing and intermediate shaft. And about the essence of problems, a little below. Automatic transmissions, almost all cars are equipped with an automatic. It is Aisin TF80SC or its later version TF80SD from 2010. Boxes with the same designation are on other models of the EUCD platform, but they are not completely interchangeable. Thus, Freelander's Hydrolock is configured to work with Ford Mazda control unit, but the plate of the Hydrolock and mechanical part is closer to the Volvo versions. These boxes are strong and quite successful in the mechanical part, but do not like overheating and dirty oil. Good news. There is almost no overheating on Freelander, and the main problem is the general wear due to loss of oil pressure and worn-out friction pads of GDT lockup friction at the mileage of 200 to 250,000. The problem is usually actually wear on the GDT lockup friction linings, wear on the GDT lockup solenoid, TCC, line pressure solenoid, EPC, and wear on the C1 drum shaft O-rings that leak pressure. This causes wear of the C2 drum frictions responsible for engaging 4th, 5th, and 6th gears over time. If you do not drive on a dying box, the drums and steel discs at the time of repair will be intact, and the total price of service will be ridiculous. 10,000 for repair of GDT, about 15,000 sets of friction and drum rings C1 new sample. Everything else usually does not require replacement, so the typical amount of 120 to 150,000 for repair of such a box in the service is probably a bit overestimated. But the owner of a Land Rover, even an old one, for a typical service looks like a purse on legs. It will be difficult to bargain. To extend the life of the automatic transmission to a reasonable maximum, It is worth changing the oil in time, at most once every 60,000 kilometers, or better twice as often. The recommended oil for this gearbox is Toyota WS, which is poorly suited by viscosity for factory sealing rings. It is better to prefer more viscous Toyota TIV. New style rings on TF80 boxes began to be put since 2015, when the Freelander 2 was no longer produced. Box filter before 2009 is felt, does not like rare oil changes, but try to keep it clean. After 2009 there was a mesh filter. With it, oil pressure drop due to clogged filter is more difficult to get, but it cleans oil worse. In case of regular oil change once in 30 to 40,000, they are equivalent. And if you put an external fine filter, the mesh filter is even more preferable. For gasoline cars, it is highly recommended to install the standard external radiator of the box with the number ELA0061105. It was equipped with the cars in sets with tow bar, and many cars in the Russian version received it initially, but if not, it is very desirable to equip the car with it. Additional specific problems with the Aisin automatic transmission on the Freelander 2 are water getting into the box control connector and corner gear failure. The water from the connector kills the box loop. The connector is part of it. The automatic transmission control unit dies along the chain. It is located right on it. Water under the insulation of wires gets into the unit and causes corrosion of the board. The four-wheel drive angular gear suffers from oil leaks and bearing wear. Roller bearings suffer from pitting corrosion of the running surfaces, even if oil is there. If there is little or no oil, wear is very rapid. It is important not to miss the moment when the box hums, so as not to allow wear of the intermediate shaft and output pinion. If you ride for a long time on a humming box and they wear out, the price of repair increases many times. A working pair will cost at least 35,000, often going up to 50 and more. A set of bearings and oil seals with a disposable spacer sleeve will cost less than 15,000. Bearing replacement work is not very complicated and usually costs from 5 to 10,000 rubles. Sometimes the intermediate shaft needs replacing due to worn splines on the box side, often caused by worn bearings and depressurization of this unit. Volvo has a similar problem with these boxes, and the parts are exactly the same, but the Land Rover gear case is slightly different. For the Freelander 2, they produce a bushing from G-Parts or other suppliers that avoids replacing the intermediate shaft with a whole working pair. Some of the responsibility for cornering problems lies with the oil seals. They quickly start to leak oil out and water in. In theory, on Freelander 2-put and Robot 6 DCT 450 in a set with Diesel 2 in 2010 to 2011. But in practice there are no such cars in our area, and the option is extremely unsuccessful, judging by rare reviews. All-wheel drive, in addition to the cornering gear problems mentioned above, there are plenty of other hassles. Haldex clutch requires oil change every 30 to 40,000, depending on the intensity of off-road exercises and driver's activity in winter. Its wiring requires monitoring the integrity of connectors, and in the rear fuse panel, located at the spare, it is better to change the fuse for the DEM block for 5-75A instead of 15 ampere, because the short circuit of contacts usually burns the block, not the fuse. It also helps with clutch oil pump motor wedging, which happens if you don't change the oil in it. Quite an expensive surprise can throw up the rear gearbox. In it the main pair and bearings also fail. Rarely, then in the corner gear, but do not discount this problem. The cause of breakage is also wear of bearings, the same water that got into it. The breather is short, the oil seals are not ideal either. By the way, often the howling of a dying corner gear masks the problem with the rear gearbox, which behaves quieter. Don't be lazy to check everything. Motors. General problems: the radiator pack is tightly packed together like on a Volvo. The radiators will have to be removed and washed separately for a full-fledged washing. And also the fan and fan controller are frankly unsuccessful. At high starting current, which happens already at 100 plus mileage due to wear of the brush unit and unsuccessful bearings, the fan controller burns out, which leads to overheating of motors. The two-fan unit, it is installed on almost all Russian Freels with climate control, is not more reliable than the single-fan unit. Because the sequential switching scheme is not used, there are just two separately adjustable fans and the control unit is more complicated than the one-fan design. Cheap Chinese copy of the control unit for 5,000 rubles is assembled on weak transistors, but, unlike the original, it is at least amenable to modernization and repair. The branded unit, which comes only together with the frame and fans, is difficult to repair. The board is filled with compound, and in such a way as to make repair difficult. but not to prevent corrosion. The complete fan unit costs over 80,000 rubles. Gasoline motors. The main gasoline motor on the Freelander 2 cannot be reproached in weakness and poor resource. For LR, they chose the strongest engine from the Volvo lineup of those years. Ford and Ella call it modestly Sci6 or 306PN, but in fact it is a derivative of Volvo B6324S. From Ford LR, it has a top cover and control unit firmware. Even the mounts here are from Volvo. The intake manifold and throttle are Volvo too. By the way, the prices are a mess. A number of components are cheaper from the Swedes, while some are from the British. For example, the intake manifold from Volvo is a third more expensive, and each of the intake flap actuators is 2 or 3 times more expensive. The crankcase gas ventilation valve, CGV, in the manifold from LR is twice as cheap as the Volvo one. And catcalators from LR are cheaper twice each. But the timing gear set for Volvo is 70,000, and for LR, 190,000. The timing chain on the Volvo is cheaper, 5,000 versus 9,000. When buying large assemblies, the difference is already very big. The short block from LR costs $1 million, which is 300,000 more than the complete Volvo motor. In general, every time you have to compare prices of parts in catalogs, if you don't want to throw money away. However, these motors almost never break down unless they are overheated. Most of the problems are related to leaks due to malfunctions of the ECG, failures of the top cover seals with diaphragm, failure of the water oil heat exchanger in case of improper maintenance, ignition system failures and vacuum pump leaks. At mileage over 300 to 350 begins to show a tendency to oil appetite, and this is not wear, but simply coking rings, and there is wear of valves and valve seals. Cylinder piston group with a successful choice of oil and good maintenance can easily change 500,000 kilometers. The biggest repair during this period will most likely be related to the timing. It will be required at 200,000. The timing mechanism here is realized very unusual. The drive of camshafts is made by a chain from the flywheel side, but, unlike BMW and VW designs, the chains are driven not directly from the crankshaft, but from a gear reducer. The design is successful in the sense that you do not need to remove the box or the engine for replacement, but the gearbox itself accumulates backlash over time due to wear of bearings and gears and begins to howl. Bearings are inexpensive to replace, as are chains. If you replace them in time, repairs will be inexpensive. But if the gears or the clutches of the phaser regulators are worn out, the costs will be considerable. The price of a set of gears is mentioned in the paragraph above. The phaser regulator is much cheaper, about 14,000, and the Volvo one is twice as expensive. At the same time, the generator and pump are driven through the gearbox and freewheel clutch, and through the pulley on the generator. And the belt, also the compressor of air conditioner and GUR. By the way, any problems with a pump, underfilled air conditioner, faulty alternator increase the load on the gearbox assembly and may lead to early failure of the gear reducer. Mostly the oil separator, or more precisely, the diaphragm of the valve built into it, fails in the ECG. It is possible to change only the diaphragm. There are repair kits, although they are not original. You can replace the cap. In the original it costs 8,000, non-original from 3, but they serve much less. They are more often corroded. In case of malfunction of VKG, the seals of the front cover of the motor and covers of timing chains flow. Spare parts are inexpensive, but there is a lot of work. Replacement of plugs is not provided in the routine work, so that ignition coils eventually fail, and the motor begins to peter, or simply loses some traction. More power is lost because of wear and failures of flaps of regulation of geometry of inlet. They are electrically driven, and slow. Reaction to gas, excessive fuel consumption and reduction of power because of them happen already at mileage about 100,000. In addition to good reliability, it has a very good sound and smooth traction from the very bottom. Its only disadvantage on Freelander is a good appetite. In city conditions it easily exceeds 16 litres per 100 even with serviceable transmission. A year before the secondary styling, the Freelander was equipped with a 2-litre EcoBoost engine from Ford in the 240 to 241 horsepower version. It replaced the time-tested inline-6. 4 cylinders with supercharging and direct injection allowed even slightly raise the power and traction. The motor is similar to the Ford TPBA R9 CB motor. On Freelander it is rare, but from the experience of operation on other cars we can draw some conclusions. The engine very much dislikes the urban cycle with its low speeds and high air temperature at the inlet. Detonation on 95 gasoline in such conditions is constantly manifested. Especially that the firmware at first was extremely unsuccessful. Detonation was poorly suppressed at all. Later the firmware was updated, but not all cars received the new software. And 98-100 gasoline does not solve the problem completely. Contamination of injectors and problems with fuel pressure due to dirt only aggravate everything. The quality of filtration is insufficient for Russian conditions. Otherwise, the motors are quite simple in terms of mechanics, and from the typical serious problems it is worth noting only the failure. Of the exhaust manifold, it is a thin-walled steel manifold and burns out, at the same time damaging the turbine with debris. And since the collector is also the housing of the hot part of the turbine, the loss will be 35,000 rubles, so much as a non-original cast iron collector, which is stronger and cheaper. The original part is not supplied separately, only assembled with the turbine. This is from 184 to 340,000 rubles. What is funny, many victims change the original for the original, because they are fans of real LR quality. You can see the problem at the very beginning by checking the seams between the collector contact plate and the spigots. The destruction usually starts from this area. A more common but less serious trouble is ruptured intercooler connections and other air leaks. The motor works with high boost pressure, and after 3 to 5 years of operation the spigots weaken. Often under high pressure they are torn. Original tubes are not cheap, but you can find silicone substitutes. The shape is quite simple. Besides, the original parts LR031918 and LR038317 have replaceable end parts. It is not necessary to buy them assembled for 10 to 30,000. The intercooler over time starts to sweat oil along the bolt, and sometimes tears the core itself due to aluminum corrosion. By the way, to muffle Freelander, it is enough to press something to the left decorative grille on the fender. The air intake is made through such a kind of snorkel, and angry neighbors have an opportunity to pour there a can of construction foam and watch the owner trying to start after parking on the lawn. In general, the EcoBoost engine is not so bad. It is relatively simple and very technological. The timing resource is small, but chains are inexpensive, and replacement is simple. It is difficult to make a mistake when replacing. Except that the splineless landing of stars implies a special tool and new bolts. Necessity to adjust valves once in 60,000, and some disposability of both the block itself and strapping does not embarrass anyone now. Well, and if you don't use 5W20 oil at mileage over 50,000, you won't have problems with oil pressure, scoring of camshaft beds, and knocking of phaser regulators. On oil's 5W40 such problems do not manifest themselves at all. Well, and traditionally all those who think that the engine has narrow channels, I recommend you to read my material on the subject. Diesel engines. The 224DT diesel engine is not actually Land Rover related either. It is made and developed by PSA, and Ford had some involvement in the development. On Peugeots and Citroëns it's known as DW12M BTD4. On Fords it's known as Q4BA or KNWA. Versions for Freelander all with one turbine. Here is usually Garrett GTB 1752 VK or MHITD 04L11 TK3 SVG on late production cars with particulate filter and 190 horsepower engines. Both turbochargers, with electric supercharger control, and the problem of French cars, which due to problems in the vacuum system is characterized by overblowing, is absent here. This diesel engine has no problems with pneumatic throttle. Land Rover puts the usual electric Bosch throttle on the intake for all versions, including cars with DPF. But there are problems with vortex flaps, on pre-restyling, oil leaks, very problematic EGR, eternally dirty dad, aka map sensor. In the intake, wear of rockers and knocks in the timing, wear of the intermediate chain in the timing drive and its calipers, souring. Injectors and failures of VKG, everything like in the French original. You might think that the motor is very scrappy, but this is not quite true. It is quite reliable and very long-lasting. It has an excellent piston life, over 500,000. It also has a good fuel equipment and a lot of thrust. But it requires specialized maintenance, knowledge of a lot of nuances and weak points. Otherwise, it is banal, does not go, and small problems will result in expensive repairs, up to early overhaul due to destruction of the cylinder head and pistons. Be careful with chipping motors. Firmware has long been hacked, easily merged and poured, and tuners promise to get 200 forces and more cheaply, but in practice, in most cases, the intervention is rough, with a complete disconnection of all the fuses. The output is a very dangerous firmware with scaling EGT, a lot of soot, turbine, and liners overload. It is difficult to assess the condition of the motor completely outside of a specialized service. It is possible to check oil leaks and traction. Only if the motor was not washed, it is more difficult to hear the chain knockout. Changing revs, because the motor is quite noisy. It is better to listen with a stethoscope. The hardest thing to check is the condition of the rockers. You can remove the vacuum pump and one of them will be visible, but it is difficult to draw conclusions from the lack of clearance between the rocker and the valve. You can get through the valve cover with an endoscope, but this option is also not the easiest to realize. The full picture can be seen only at disassembly, but no one will give to disassemble the motor for diagnostics. It can be considered that in the presence of knocking from the cylinder head we'll have to change everything, and the chain and rockers. If you start the problem, the contact surface of the rocker is squashed, it starts to press on the spring plate. As a result, the valve will sooner or later loosen and fall into the cylinder. The chances of Stalingrad in this case are very high. It is highly recommended to clarify when the injectors were removed. They are stuck to the ground, often in the end they are drilled out with the removal of the cylinder head, and in the worst case the cylinder head is replaced. At the initial stage, the problem can be smelled at startup. The injector is sticking because of the skipping of gases. So if there is bubbling, it's time to remove, clean the well and replace the sealing washers. The camshafts also wear on low viscosity oil and rocker wear. On the cars of the first releases, camshafts sometimes break. The shank of the drive of the fuel injection system breaks, and after 2008 to 2009 the problem does not occur. The shaft became steel, not cast iron. But steel shafts are more prone to cam wear. It is not difficult to check the condition of the crankshaft pulley, but you must be very careful to notice cracks under layers of dirt. It is not difficult to recognize a newer pulley that does not turn. It has a characteristic gear on the inside. Not very successful intake pipe from the filter to the throttle on cars before restyling with resonators is better to change to A. Restyling straight, with it better traction and less noise. Well and flaps on the inlet in cars before restyling must be removed. If there are drive elements, check their presence with an endoscope. There are also problems characteristic mainly for Freelander, and almost all of them are clearly visible. The motor either does not work at all, or on the dashboard lights up engine power limitation and the car does not go. The most frequent Land Rover trouble, not typical for its French versions, is a rupture of pipes to and from the intercooler. The problem is also treated quite simply. As on the 2.0 gasoline engine, all parts can be repaired. Geometry actuator rod slugging on turbos and electric actuator failure are slightly less common and are often associated with the first problem. Actuator errors numbered P2562-63 indicate under or overblow. Pipes are very sensitive to overblowing. The old ones only need a small pressure spike when there is no error yet. To reduce the risks, they recommend to shift the turbine geometry drive manually several times at each maintenance and sometimes give the motor full thrust at least for a couple of minutes to burn deposits on the exhaust manifold and turbine. Completely clogged map sensor on other cars with this motor is also not found, but on Freelander it sometimes gets so covered with carbon deposits that it shows weather on Mars, so it should be washed regularly. Overblowing of the fuel system is also typical for Ford motors. In this case, the pair of manual pumping is put from analogues from PSA. At the same time, it helps quite well when replacing fuel filters. The procedure becomes much cheaper and not traumatic for the fuel injection system. The thermostat with a running seam is a Ford legacy. You should use a PSA version. There is no running seam on the plastic. Antifreeze supply hose to the heat exchanger 8A520 is delaminating, and it is expensive and includes a large metal element, so it is often coal-horsed. In general, cooling pipes are not super reliable. The most complaints about the T number LR8260D and pipe LR8286. Engine control unit failure due to poor location and water ingress has already been discussed above in the electrical section. Water gets into the connector and gradually seeps through the seals, damaging both the connector itself and the contacts in the ECU unit. DPKV on a diesel engine is a consumable. There is always water under the casing. Just always have a spare. Detail original price of non-original 2-motor radiator 29607 Termal 5096 Nissan 7208 timing belt 2 handled. Diotandit. 26 168 Daco 1713 Gates 3077 Timing set 2.2 TD 427 214 Daco 8 479 Senior 9901 Turbocharger for 2.275 739 MHI 123469 Garrett 41855 Drone Garrett Replacement 19087 Timing Gear for 3.2 194 897 Not available Fuel Injector for 2.2 TD 493 538 Bosch 74 720 Baruida 46 207 To take or not to take. There are no failed versions of Freelander 2. Motors are good, diesel 2.2 and gasoline 2.0, and very good, gasoline 3.2. The car also has a good gearbox, and the suspension is designed with a good safety margin. Blindly and cheaply to take such car is not recommended, but after careful diagnostics and estimation of own forces on maintenance. Of Freel in serviceable condition, it can be quite recommended for purchase. In conclusion, the Land Rover Freelander 2 offers a commendable suspension system that enhances its off-road capabilities and overall driving experience. However, potential buyers should be aware of the numerous issues associated with the French diesel engine, which can lead to costly repairs and maintenance. While the Freelander 2 has its strengths, it is essential to weigh these against the challenges posed by the engine. Ultimately, thorough research and careful consideration are key to making an informed decision about this versatile vehicle. Thank you for watching, and we hope this video has provided valuable insights into the Land Rover Freelander 2.